But back to the main question you've asked me, and that is this business of becoming a settling defendant. So in 2018, when we agreed to enter into serious negotiations on a consent decree, just like we became a PRP in 1992 on priority soils, just like we became a respondent to a unilateral order in 2011, we now were called a settling defendant because we were going to agree and settle under this consent decree all the claims that the federal government, and by extension the state government, had against Atlantic Richfield and Butte-Silver Bow. And that's what they called us. And so when the consent decree was announced in February of 2020, between then and when it was approved by our local government in the spring, by May of 2020, and then by September of 2020, in the heat of the COVID, I might add, that's when we were called, if you will, I don't know the best way to say it, but now we were settling defendants because that's what you were called if you were signing a consent decree. And we, of course, stayed true to our mission. You know, we had three goals as a local government representing our community, and they guided every decision we made. The first and foremost was the remedial action had to be protective of human health and the environment. It had to be maxing out on making sure we were doing right by the natural resource, either the soil or the water or people's health. 2, we needed to make sure that these areas that were getting cleaned up had a beneficial use for our community. It was one thing to, fence them off. Okay, they were clean and they were safe, but nobody could use them. And we didn't think that was a satisfactory result. And so we believe that every cleanup action had to come with a land use plan that made sure the community was left with something worthwhile once the remedial action was taken care of. Ergo, the Copper Mountain Park was on top of the Clark tailings. Foreman's Park and the Mountain Con Park area on top of the cleaned area in the Granite Mountain Memorial cleanup area. And the part where the chamber building is on George Street, it was one thing to clean it up, but it was another thing to make sure that that land had value when it was all over. The Tullamore Housing Division, there are a dozen or so different examples. The BAMP pedestrian trail from Rocker to up on the hill here at the Kelly. All of these end land uses were the result after the cleanup activity was performed, and that was very important to us. And then thirdly, the third leg of the stool was to make sure that the city-county and all of its citizens were insulated from the cost of all this cleanup and the end land use improvements, and there would be sufficient dollars set aside in the forever to take care of it, take care of these areas forever. So in order to achieve these 3 goals, we continued to cooperate with Atlantic Richfield to make sure that we didn't have to pay, and in fact, they paid for everything up until that point They paid for everything that's going to happen now under the consent decree. There's 9 or 10 work plans that are embedded in that consent decree that they're designing now. And then the maintenance on all those areas in perpetuity. And for that, we agreed to be a settling defendant, because that's the way it had to happen under the legal process we were going through.
So that was the road to becoming a settling defendant.
That was the road to becoming a settling defendant.
And I like to quote, "Welcome to the beginning of Butte's future in the post-Superfund era. It's been a long road for our community, but we're finally at a point where we see light at the end of the tunnel. After years of dissent among these parties, we finally committed to reach an agreement for our community. When this process began, there were 3 principles that were non-negotiable for Butte-Silver Bow. 1, an agreement must do right by the resource in terms of protecting human health and protecting our surface waters and environment from further degradation. Number 2, an agreement must protect taxpayers' pocketbook and insulate them from costs of the cleanup. Number 3, an agreement must ensure the cleanup supports future land uses beneficial to the public. We are proud to stand up and say that we are confident that the scope of work and the related provisions contained in the proposed consent decree agreement will meet those 3 principles. Do right by the resource, both human and natural. And do right by the taxpayer. And do right by the development of our community."
That the consent decree itself, this is the legal instrument that is in fact the consent decree. That's got some 156 pages. And then these attachments are very critical to understanding what's going on. In particular, this attachment A, or appendix A, that is what's called the Record of Decision Amendment. And if you all have been tracking this, in 2006, the EPA came out with called a Record of Decision on how the cleanup would occur. And then it was supposed to lead to a consent decree in about 2010, 2011. Well, now it's 2020, some 13, 14 years later, and things have changed. We've learned a lot about how the site has been performing. We learned a lot between 1991 and 2006 when the Record of Decision came out. But now we've learned as much more again about how to clean up the hill, how to get the water quality in Silver Bow Creek raised to the standards, how to take care of the place in perpetuity. And so there's changes that the EPA has agreed to, the state of Montana has agreed to, Atlantic Richfield Company has agreed to, and Butte-Silver Bow, as the 2 settling defendants, Atlantic Richfield and Butte, we've agreed to. And those changes are embodied in what's called the Record of Decision Amendment. And I think that's a testament also to all the public input that we've received in these 13 years.
Compliments, I think, are in order for just getting this far. My presumption is that the desires of the community, a lot of which were evidenced by the public processes that were undertaken by Restore Creek Coalition, were reflected in the negotiations, as you said. And I think there's compliments to be given for a couple major things that are in the CD and the ROD changes. One being the removal of the tailings. That was, as you know, the Restore Creek Coalition's mission was to remove tailings, restore creek, and have amenities that took that center of Butte and did something good with it for the community. And I must say I was pleasantly surprised when ARCO agreed to remove the tailings because they'd been adamant about not removing the tailings. And so I'm assuming you leveraged that in the discussions, and that's very good. As you know, the Restore Creek Coalition ended up with a Silver Bow Creek Headwaters Park Plan. In essence, there was an effort to replicate that planning that was done by Butte-Silver Bow and ARCO. It was essentially duplicating what was already done. But the good thing was that 90% of what came out in the plan for amenities here was congruent with what was in the Silver Bow Park plans, Silver Bow Creek Headwaters Park Plan. So again, that is a good thing. The core of Silver Bow Creek, Restore Creek Coalition was about, it was about those things which are important, but it was about restoring the creek, though we know it can take a long time, from Texas Avenue down to the confluence with Blacktail Creek. So while there's a lot of compliments for what's in the document, I have some concern about what's not in the document. EPA, to their credit, ended up funding a review of whether or not a restored Silver Bow Creek could be done in a manner that was that the remedy did not interfere with the future restoration. And Restore Creek Coalition started requesting that back in late 2018 and did not receive any financing to have that done until the fall of 2019, almost a year later. And the analysis proved to be positive. But part of what was requested by Restore Creek Coalition was some evidence inside the CD and the documents that there was a commitment to actually making it happen, actually making restoration happen. Not that it would not be precluded, but that it would happen. The Restore Creek Coalition requested that the CD include language in it about restoring the creek, that the CD have attachments to it that demonstrated how that could be done. None of that is in the CD. It's not in the CD. In fact, other than the Silver Bow Creek west of Montana Street in the Butte reduction area, you talk about Silver Bow Creek there, but you don't see the word creek occur in terms of anything inside the CD for east of Montana Street, and particularly, I mean, above Casey Street as well, all the way behind the Civic Center. Now, to ARCO's credit, again, working mainly with Josh, they've set aside some reserve space in the Diggings East and the North Side Tailing, some reserve land in which it represents a potential corridor for a future creek. And I credit them for that. They did a good job of doing that. If you look at the documents, however, the word creek doesn't appear. When they do manage to even discuss what might be in that reserve land, they use the words water feature. Okay? So if you stay in this stuff long enough, you know that that verbal commitments don't mean much. When things are going to take 30 years, and these are going to take another 10, 15, 20 years, people are going to change on the council, people are going to change who are working for ARCO. Some of us are not even going to be here. We've been working on this for a long time. So it's important that things be committed to in writing and have some legal basis for some feeling that something's going to happen. Now, John mentioned, and it's true, that there's some money being set aside in a trust fund, although I must say it's hard to find any of this inside the documents, and I'm going to be sending a request saying, show me where I can find the language on this, because I'm going cross-eyed looking for it. But nonetheless, there is a trust fund, which was one of the things we wanted to see happen, and that trust fund is to be used for the Blacktail Creek burn and restoration, to restore some of the monies that were, the second phase of monies that were done from NRD sources to finish the Parrot tailings and to kind of repay that. And then Patrick Holmes, the representative of the governor the other day, made the point that there was going to be $1 million of that set aside for a creek. Well, yeah, but guess what? It's not in the CD. It's not in the CD. That commitment is not by the parties. That commitment is a verbal commitment from the governor who has to implement it outside of the CD. I asked Patrick specifically about that. He says, we're going to do that. So you can see that the CD itself hardly tips the hat toward the restoration of the creek from Texas Avenue down to the confluence with Blacktail Creek. Now this is a long and complicated and difficult thing, and it's been priced out by the study by Water Environmental Technologies. It's maybe costing from anywhere from $9 to $14 million, $9 to $15 million. There's no recognition of that whatsoever in the CD. There's a set aside of reserve land, okay, but that's about it. And then you get above Casey Street, and there's no talk about connecting the area above Casey Street where the Parrot tailings are, running down there and having a creek flow where the creek was, or a variation on that. It's not in the CD. Now, I want to just make those points because, excuse me?
Are you getting close?
We'll see. We can spend 30 minutes listening to something else, we can spend 5 minutes wondering what's not in the CD.
I'd like to respond.
So, well, excuse me, let me finish. I think that we need to sit down and see what, nobody wants to upset this CD. This CD has most of the stuff in it that needs to be in it. And if you tilt something like that over, it's not a good thing. But we need to be exploring what can we do as a community, and what can our representatives do as a community, and our government do as a community, even if it's outside the CD, to legally recognize the stuff that we're talking about here, or other, if we don't, it's a kiss and a promise. And then we don't know what's going to happen 10 years from now. So, compliments again on what's in there. You know, it's a huge deal. It's a big deal. It's a great deal that needed to be done for Butte. But let's not, in loving what's in it, forget about what's not in it.
So first of all, I would point your attention to this addendum 1 in the end land use additions. That's in the CD. It is a commitment as it relates to the land use commitments that makes a lot of this possible. Very important. I also turn your attention to section 20, paragraph 20, I think it is, or 21 in the CD, where it says that there shall be a $20.5 million payment from the Atlantic Bridgestone Company to the state of Montana to perform this act, to fix this section of Blacktail Creek. Very important. The CD also specifies that any surplus dollars from that endeavor, now, they're getting $20.5 million. This is less than a half a mile. The state of Montana has completed the Silver Bow Creek remedy from Butte to the Warren Springs ponds. It cost them $143 million. It's 26 miles, you do the math, and how much it costs per mile. So it gives you a flavor for how much money is going to be left from that 20.5 million for other investments in the corridor. Okay? So we think maybe minimum of 10, maximum of maybe even 15. The CD also says those surplus dollars shall be spent in this corridor. And that's a function of what we want the money spent on. Now, we've done this at the feasibility study, very useful. It has outlined some serious challenges to getting the piece done from Texas all the way to the confluence that I mentioned. But in this document, there's also a commitment by Atlantic Richfield to rebuild the existing channel so it doesn't look like a trapezoid anymore, and it looks like a stream, and it continues to have a functional purpose in protecting water quality in Silver Bow Creek. We can't lose that. That's important. That continues to perform its purpose. The state of Montana is in control of that $20.5 million. They will dictate, and that's what I think Patrick was alluding to. All right, once we got the Blacktail Creek project done, once we're done with the Parrot project, now I hope in weaving into phase 2 of the Parrot project, we can get them to address that stretch from Texas Avenue to Harrison and even on to Casey Street here. I can say this, we get the CD over the finish line, we get these projects done, we've made our commitment to water quality and the pathway to addressing what we've set out. And Restorer Creek was our leader, but this community has wanted this corridor to look good forever, and the entire corridor. And we're confident, and I would like maybe Atlantic Richfield to add how much of the resources that they're going to spend that they otherwise would not have spent to make this corridor all it can be. So, acknowledging the reality that we don't have a guarantee on certain sections, we do have a guarantee that a lot of this work that is aesthetic and end land use driven will get done to complement the remedy that otherwise would not have gotten done. So we're not there yet, but we will get there.